sorry about the weather. I didn't quite plan that bit, did I? What I will say is I'm going to start talking up here. You may or may not know that my foot and my hand are playing up something chronic, so I will go and sit down after this first bit and use the radio mic. So we'll test again if you can't hear. Can everyone hear me now? Yes. Brilliant. Right. This trip to Canada, actually Hilary and I have got something very similar. We both planned to go, and then a certain disease came along. And of course, nothing happened. So I went in June, July this year, and to say it was an amazing trip is an understatement, although I think most of you know I had a bit of a hiccup halfway through. So I am going to start. This is not quite accurate because this is a map for a slightly different tour, but it gives you an idea of where I went. So I started in Vancouver. I did the bit in black first, which is the land tour. I then did the cruise bit, which is the blue bit. You can tell I'm a geographer by training, can't you? And then after that, I did an extra little bit back over to here, which is called Tofino in Vancouver Island. So I kept sort of doing a little bit like a clover leaf with Vancouver as the centre. Many of you will recognise that. If you've been to Canada, that is Canada Place, and it is the centre of downtown. It has changed beyond belief since I went there many years ago, and it is now used as a cruise dock. One thing the Canadians do which we don't is they're a bit more interesting architecture. The first two there are the library. The last one, I have to be honest, I don't know if I'd want to live in it. You're in a very volatile earthquake zone, and the building at the top is wider than the building at the bottom. I'm not going to say anything more than that. Some of you will recognise the Gastown clock. I'm not going to talk for every single one, I will for these. Now, only the Canadians can make a thing of the raindrop. That is literally a statue or a model or whatever of a raindrop. But you also, if you've got cement, you don't leave it a nasty, boring thing. You make it look a bit pretty. Downtown Vancouver, like many towns. Now, this again is somewhere which many of you will know. I'm doing it for this bit because this is a bit which I know many of you will recognise. It's Stanley Park. Went round on a horse, not literally on a horse-drawn carriage. This was the Rose Garden. The smell was amazing. That's much of Stanley Park. And Canadians have to do a one-upmanship. You've got the Little Mermaid, so you have to have girl in a wetsuit. Although, right next to girl in the wetsuit, this is the bald eagle. There are more bald eagles in Canada than there are in America, although the Americans don't like to be reminded. And you only have to look at his beak and his claws to think, yeah, you wouldn't have much chance. The totem poles, again, very famous. They don't worship them. That's one big thing they kept on saying. They're used as either an equivalent of grave markers or town markers. And that's the northern shore. The north shore is where Capilano and Grouse Mountain are. Now, some of you will recognise this. This is Capilano. Well, I gave one look at that. I have been across it before. I didn't like it. So I decided to be a bit of a wuss. Here is the other one, which is the new bit of the cliff walk. And you actually have, the canyon is down there. Now, I wasn't brave enough, but somebody else was brave enough.
Right. Well, I wasn't really brave, but I was encouraged to do it by Richard, who said I'd be a coward if I didn't. But just to give a little background to our visit, and it's very difficult for me to follow the lovely photos that Anne has shown you. But I have prepared some photos of the Capilano Suspension Bridge and Grouse Mountain in Vancouver. Quite a few of you will have seen these photos already, but I hope you'll enjoy looking at them again. I thought I'd add a brief commentary just in case the labels on the photos don't show up very well. So, here goes. In September 2022, Richard and I visited Canada. Our holiday had been postponed for 2 years, but the wait was worthwhile as the scenery was fabulous and the people were very welcoming. Oh, it's not working. The wrong one. Oh, wrong one. Oh, apologies for using the wrong one. That's right. Okay. Now, my first 5 photos were taken at the Capilano Suspension Bridge. This bridge is a suspension bridge crossing the Capilano River, as Anne said, in North Vancouver, and it's 460 feet long and 230 feet above the river, and it attracts 1.2 million visitors each year. And it wobbles, and it dips in the middle. Now that's me. Now as you can see from the picture of me on the bridge, I was very nervous at walking across it, especially when a fellow walker told me that the bridge wobbled most of all at the halfway point. So having started, I was really nervous about getting to the halfway point. Anyway, eventually I got into a rhythm, albeit a very slow one, and made it to the other side. But then, of course, I had to come back. And in this photo, can you see the man in the background? There. Because I'm waving my right hand, he's waving his right hand to mimic me, because he could see Richard was taking my photo. I didn't know that, but that's what was happening. So strange things happen on the bridge. And that just shows how high it is. And the curve. That's right. Now, we went up. My next 4 photos are of Grouse Mountain. Grouse Mountain is one of the North Shore Mountains of the Pacific Ranges in North Vancouver. It rises to 4,100 feet and is the site of an alpine ski area. The views from the top are absolutely breathtaking, and we were able to see close up 2 bears inside the compound on the mountain. You'll see that from the photos. And we were also very impressed by the lovely wood carvings that there were from the inside of stumps of fallen trees. So that's the gondola that we went up on. That's at the summit. The sculpture at the top of the mountain. And that's one of the lovely wood carvings that there were. The tree trunks were absolutely massive in diameter. And the carving was really intricate, and you could get up really close. You see there's a little owl there. Must have taken hours. That's right, these are the bears. Now, we thought they were brown bears, but our friend Anne tells me they're grizzly bears. We got it wrong, because they've got teddy bear ears. See, so they're grizzly bears. Oh, that's yours. So that's yours?
Yes, if you can, yes.
Yeah, you'd have that one.
Could we just check? I'm moving on to this now. Can you still hear me? Everyone's okay? Right. So what happens, unfortunately, all too often in Canada is that there are roadkill of mother bears. So they have a choice of what they do with the cubs. They either have to euthanize them or they put them in enclosures. Now, they're not the sort of enclosures that you and I think of for zoos. They are huge. These bears have got ponds, they've got the lot. And they may or may not do what mine did, because when I was there, the ranger was feeding them apples, which, surprise, surprise, made them come over. And the one thing I would like you to have a look at is their claws. The grizzlies, people are absolutely petrified because your chance of survival is very low if you actually meet them too close. And that gives an even better view of those claws. And that's the other one wandering over to get his apple as well. And that's the view back down to Vancouver. And so where I was before, that's Canada Place. I was then lucky enough to go on the Rocky Mountaineer. As you can see, the weather was pretty grim. And this is just a few places as we went along. And then this is the one I will stop at. If I'd gone and tried to do this trip in August, I wouldn't have been able to do it because of the forest fires. This is Lytton, or should I say this was Lytton. In 2021, it was engulfed with a forest fire. The bit I find hardest of lot, there's the zebra crossing. There's nothing left. And it was the mood on that train changed completely because we suddenly thought, yeah, we've got no idea of what fire can do in that destructive way. And when you see some of the valleys, how on earth they get out at all is sometimes quite amazing. Although that one's not very clear, thanks to the rain, it gives you an idea. You're just surrounded by dead trees. And of course, one of the biggest problems is British Columbia is based, and actually Alberta, timber is one of their biggest industries. It's a real issue. So you have that rather than that. One of the biggest problems I think anyone who's been to Canada will have had is the size of the country. It is just huge. And this is the last spike. So this literally, somewhere on that bit of rail, they managed to put the last spike, which meant that you could link the whole of Canada together for the first time back in the late 1890s. And you stop and think, you know, it's not that long ago that Canada just literally wasn't even a country, let alone linked together. And then this was the highlight. I will admit that the first photo isn't mine. We suddenly saw this bear stood up. Bears don't stand up normally, so we're not quite sure what it was doing. And then we all had a thing of, it wasn't someone in a costume, was it? But it was a bear. The second one is one of mine, and that's the much more normal view of a bear. We were delighted because we had seen bears. But I was very lucky because I was downstairs outside when, a bit further on, we came across this. And I'm sure you can see, I feel very sorry for this bear cub because he kept on looking up at the top. So I have a horrible feeling he'd made his way down, Mum was at the top calling him, and he wasn't quite sure how to get back up. But hopefully he was okay. And that shows him again. And we landed up, that is the Rocky Mountains. You could see the sort of weather. It was a bit disappointing, shall we say. And we landed up in Banff. Well, most of you will know that Banff and I didn't actually get on very well. I saw hotel room, hospital room, and that was about it. And so this is where I definitely went to Hilary, help!
Well, the rest of my photos are of Banff in Alberta. Pardon? Oh, sorry.
Turn something.
Oh,
that's it.
Yeah, sorry, must have cancelled it. Yes, Banff National Park is the first of Canada's national parks and is the best known. It was established in 1885 after the discovery of natural hot springs by 3 Canadian Pacific Railway workers in 1883. And I must admit, this was our favourite place, and we were very fortunate to be able to explore much of it on foot. We were told that a bear had been walking down the high street the day before we arrived, and we were advised, if we met a bear, to keep calm and talk to ourselves, because that way they aren't attracted to you. And on no account were we to panic, which wasn't really very easy if you think about when you're going to be met by one of these huge creatures. I'll just show you. This is Sulphur Mountain, which is just outside Banff. And we were taken up there on a gondola. And the view from the top, which I'll show you, was absolutely marvellous, looking down on the Bow River. And at the very top of Sulphur Mountain is Sanson's Peak, containing a disused observatory. And they're shown in my other photo. And you can see the Bow River. We're really high up because the Bow River is that little snake, you know, which looks really small. And yet when you're down there, it's quite a wide river, isn't it, Rick? And we were fortunate. It was a lovely day. Oh, that's the hotel, Banff Springs Hotel, which is in the style of a Scottish baronial mansion. And you can see that from the architecture. And that's at the top where the observatory is. And we did actually climb to the top, didn't we, Rick? So, but it was quite a way up. And there were lots of children there. They wouldn't get out of the way so we could take a decent photo. They were so excited. And then that's the Bow River, which was lovely. But what I was going to say was, at the top of Sulphur Mountain, because it was my big birthday, 2 years late, we had a nice meal. And the waitress said, is it a special meal that you're celebrating? And so we said, well, it is sort of. It's a bit late, but it was for my birthday. So she said, well, leave it with me. And then 10 minutes later, she came back with a cake. And on the in the icing on it, it said, for a sort of anniversary. And it was lovely, wasn't it, Richard? A lovely meal and a lovely view. Right. So this is the Bow River. And this is where the First Nations used to carve their bows, hence the name, using wood from trees growing beside the river. And the Bow River waterfalls also provided wonderful scenery. We walked along the side, and the trees were just beginning to change colour. It was lovely. You didn't get many orange trees. It was mainly light yellow and light green, wasn't it? But you could just saunter along, you know. It was quite easy walking, and you really got the atmosphere. It was very nice. And these are the waterfalls that were along the Bow River. And at certain points, you've got rainbows in the rocks where the sun was shining on the rock. Sort of turquoisey blue, the river. Oh, that's right, next one. We also visited Banff Museum, which contained many animal exhibits, although perhaps not entirely suited to modern taste. It's a sort of Victorian museum. And then we went to the underground cave and basin trail, where we saw the hot springs, and that was a real highlight. Early 20th century guests were able to swim in the thermal waters, but today the swimming pool has been paved over, as you can see. So you can actually see the springs coming through the water. So this was, we're in the 1930s, that was a sort of swimming pool. And there were pictures of bathers, rubber caps, bathing caps. We walked along the Fenland Trail, where we saw the Vermilion Lakes. Beautiful colour. It's sort of in the distance, but the colour was vermilion. And we also visited Moraine Lake. It was a lovely day. But the rock piles beside the lake, they need a bit of climbing, and there aren't many handrails, were there, Richard? But the view from the top was worth doing, making the effort. Oh, then, that's right. Then we visited what they call the White Museum, which contained statues of the First Nation people and the original log cabins of the original settlers. And they were beautifully made, these log cabins. Oh, is that the wrong one? That's right, yeah. But we just had to return to the Cave and Basin Trail for our final glimpse of the Banff National Park. And these 3 photos are the ones that I'll leave you with, because they were the ones that really stopped in our memory, didn't they? Because by the time we left, it was just beginning to get to autumn, so the trees were changing even more. I think that's the last one. Yes, that's Anne's photo of Banff. Thank you for listening, and if you want any more details, please see Richard or me. We'll try and remember. He can do a bit of work.
The only problem with those photos is that they make me green. Because I just look at those and just think, if only. On the other hand, I could have landed up on a plane back to Britain. So that's the way I have to think about it. This is my other view of Banff. I'm on the way to the pharmacy. It was a really exciting town as far as I was concerned. But what I would say is that's one of the most famous views of Banff, because you have the mountain at the back. That's the Cascade Mountain. Now, this is when my brain begins to go, pardon? The whole of this area is above Ben Nevis, just the ground level. So we're already above Ben Nevis, where we are just walking around. These are 10,000 feet, these mountains. And the scale is just mind-blowing. Any of you have been there, or to Australia, where you have this very large scenery, I find it quite sort of awe-inspiring, to say the least. And there we are, there is the Cascade Mountain. You know, wouldn't it be nice if we could drive on roads like that? This is the main road, the busy road between Banff and Lake Louise. I'm not going to say any more than that. And those of you who might have had an email when I was ill and I said I'm okay again, it was Lake Louise. I absolutely fell in love with this place, and I think you can understand why. The colour is because of the glacial, I will be a bit geographical for a second, it's the glacial flower. And you find it in most of the lakes. You've definitely found it in Moraine Lake, you find it in the lake here. And, you know, because I'd been ill, they were really nice to me. They gave me a room, an upgraded suite, no less. And that was my view out of my bedroom. It's, really hard. And that is, yes, it is. That doesn't look quite the same colour. It doesn't look quite right, but that is the next morning, at 5 o'clock in the morning. And there are already, you won't be able to see them because they're so tiny, there's already people out on kayaks. I won't make any comment, but the early mornings was the one thing I didn't really get used to. And that's a bit later in the day. Sorry, I love reflections. And to me, that is just such a special picture. A random lake. I've no idea what its name is, but it's just... And it's the size of the scenery, which... it's all... I keep on using the word awe-inspired, because there's nothing else. And as you're going to see in a moment, your brain does begin to go, pardon. So, these little dots are cars. Now, I'm not talking about the sorts of cars that we have. You climb in them, but they are much bigger and much more powerful because they need to be. Because obviously in the winter in this area, you're in trouble if you haven't got anything very powerful. So those are the cars. So then you begin to look at the height of those mountains and begin thinking, brings to mind many Bible verses, of course, as well. Wrong one. And we went to the Athabasca Lake, a glacier. Now, this is one of the glaciers which is fast disappearing. Someone on our trip had been here 8 years before and actually sent out a photo, and the difference is frightening. But what is also frightening is those little black dots there are those big vans there. So this big van was that little dot. And as you can see, they're rather huge. And you have a very interesting, I call it that, journey up to the glacier. And that's the real scene. Now, I know where I'm looking, but I can tell you, you won't be able to find them. Those big vans are there. And if I tried to go to, this is Medicine Lake, if I tried to go to Medicine Lake a week earlier, it would have been impossible. Unexpectedly, and not forecast, they had 2 foot of snow. It caused complete and utter chaos because they'd packed away all their snow plows and everything else. No one could move. Everyone was stuck in Jasper, which is where this is nearby. Everyone was stuck in Jasper, unable to get out. But it did mean that the scenery was a bit special. This lake disappears gradually, so by September, there's nothing left in it. And when we came back along here, it was windy, so this reflection had gone. But that's a pretty good reflection. Rarer than bear sightings are moose sightings. These are yearlings. And all I could call it was round and round the, ring a ring of roses. They were chasing each other around in circles. It was quite funny to watch. On the way back, we've got a horrible feeling. A load of people got, in fact, every car was empty. Now we think people were following these. I hope it was them that they were following, not the bear and the 2 cubs. Because of course it's absolutely illegal to get out if you're calm in any of these places, for obvious reasons. And there we are, still proof of the snow. This is Malign Lake. If you've been to Jasper, you would actually know this one. It's called Malign Lake because some preacher did what the local First Nation people told him not to do and try and jump a big waterfall. And basically, he didn't manage it and he lost his horse. So he blamed everybody else apart from himself. It is stunning. And of course, there's more snow because of the snow we just had. Just to prove I was actually there. I'm going to stop on that one again because it's a different fact this time, and it's again more worrying one. We saw lots of trees which were dead and dying, as you can see some in there. They are the Douglas firs. They are being killed because the winters are not cold enough, and so a bug is getting in and killing all the trees. And we were seeing not 1 or 2, but literally millions of those. Wherever we went in this area, there were these dead and dying trees. And they said the only thing which can stop it is 2 things: fire or cold winters. Otherwise, because they shouldn't be there. But climate warming is having yet another effect. Spirit Island, the one in the middle here, is one of those few places where we would not go. We were not allowed to go. It's a First Nation burial plot. And the people on the boat said that once a year, the First Nation people come to honour their dead. And they said they all fight to be on that one because the First Nation people are in there for regalia. And it's quite a sight. I have a thing about reflections. So you saw Malign Lake. Well, this is the Malign River. And of course, because of all that snow, it was quite powerful. We then were beginning to make our way back down towards Whistler. And there is one mountain which is renowned, Mount Robson. It's the highest mountain in the Canadian Rockies. Now, this one I do have to look for. It is 12,989 feet, no less. It's normally seen about 12 days a year. And you go along and you can't see it until you literally turn that corner. And we turned the corner and you could see it. I would have loved to spend ages here. That's the trouble. That's the one problem with being on a coach trip. You go, yeah, but etc. We've all done it. And that's that mountain. I'm not going to say you can guess what these are. But can you imagine deer in this country? He just stood there watching us, and we all stood there with our cameras, and it just went, okay, I'll just wander off. Not all of it is tree covered. This is a sort of a desert area in interior British Columbia. Now, thinking about, 2 hours ago, and looking at that sky, we were waiting to go up on a seaplane. We were waiting for the thunderstorm to finish. It was a real shall we, shan't we? And I have to say, the first bit of going up, I did think, why did I do it? Because it was decidedly bumpy. But it gave us views over Whistler. One person in particular I know will be quite interested in those. But again, thinking about those forest fires, can you see how trapped in people are? There's very few ways out. the comment, I sent this one to Katie, who would have been here tonight, but unfortunately, I think it's fair to say Mark's father is very ill, so couldn't come. Her comment was, I've never seen you look so happy. And we went to the First Nations centre there. I'm not going to even try and pronounce that name. But we could see the classic carving and the canoes and so on. And then the last bit we did in Whistler is the peak to peak, which is basically you go up in one gondola, you go across in another one, and down in another. I spent ages doing that, so you go up there, across there, and down there. All in Whistler, because of course, Whistler was part of the Olympics in 2010, but it is a major ski area. And so off we went. Now that's the view. That actually is the other mountain, that's Whistler Mountain, which we're going to go across to. They're full of their world records. This is the longest unsupported span. There's only 4 pylons across this whole valley. And you have a choice of cars you go in. You either go in the normal one, which is the red one, or you queue for the blue one, which you have a view down through the middle. Now the idea is you see bears. I failed. So did everybody else. It was a hot day, and I think the bears went, nah, too much effort. And this is when I go, Canadians are mad. I've just come across on the peak to peak. You may not be able to see, but there is a chairlift up there. And along the top there, you might just be able to see a little line. So remembering our concerns about Capilano, imagine doing a walk across that bridge at the top there. What a shame, it was windy that day. They didn't let anyone up. And just the views are just tremendous. And Marion, when George said he went biking, I have a feeling this might be the sort of biking he was doing. He might not have told you, but it's become the most popular, it's more popular now than skiing in Whistler. It has to be seen. They get 4 bikes into one of those gondolas with the people in the one before, so they can then grab them the other end. They clean off the seats with a quick brush, and then they go down the mountain or by bike. Rather them than me. And that's Whistler. But it wasn't about 5 o'clock, and everyone was either going home for lunch or meal or everything. So it was a bit quiet. And I'm going to finish any moment now. And so the next bit of the trip was over to Vancouver Island. I'm going to show one more photo. Gives you an idea that leaving the Rocky Mountains behind. And I'm going to stop there. Will be tea and coffee in a moment. That worked out really well, because it's worked out the timing's worked out brilliantly. One thing I meant to say, and I forgot to say, I was doing an APT tour, and that is Australian Pacific. So there was 5 Brits, and all the rest were Aussies. Which, Jill, can you imagine the fun and games we were having? Because it was June and July, and there was a certain cricket on. You just had to give as good as you got. But boy, oh boy, did I get ribbed about it, shall we say. This is Chevenus. Now, I loved this place. I would have loved to be able to stop there longer. I'm going to show you, there's a whole series which I will show you in a moment. It is a little village on Vancouver Island. It used to be very important in timber, and the logging closed. And so they said, well, what are we going to do? How are we going to make a living? And someone came up with an idea of doing mules. And these mules are all over the town. I think they're amazing. Unfortunately, I would have loved much longer here because, of course, you can see some of them, but not all of them because some of them are further away, etc. So I've just given you a selection of them here. And can I just say, I am not mad because in one of them in a moment, it's going to look as if I've got no idea of what a flat angle is. Because the road is like this, but the trees are right. So when it looks a bit odd, it's not me, it is actually, this time, it's actually the way things work. And that one's so long, that's the next bit of it. They're becoming much more aware of First Nations. So wherever you go nowadays, they're saying this is First Nation land. Well, not everywhere, but 99% of them, of course, because it was all used by First Nations before any, excuse me, anyway from Britain came. And that's what it actually looks like. Right, I'm not going mad. Mile 0. This is the road which goes right across Canada, the Trans-Canadian Highway. Starts in Victoria, and it goes right the way across Canada, 4,800 plus miles. If you drove 250 miles a day, it would take nearly 3 weeks. Which if you're anything like me and watching the race around the world when they were doing Canada, you realise why it was taking them so long to get from one side to the other. Sometimes you're lucky. That's the view from my hotel window. And you have got the Empress Hotel, which is one of the Fairmount hotels. That's that one over there. You've got the Parliament Building. Now, how many of you knew that the Parliament Building was not in Vancouver? It's over in Victoria. It's over there. You've got the seaplanes, and I'll talk about that little thing a bit later on. And so the view changes. I'm pretty pleased with that one. Over 3,000 bulbs around the House, well, the equivalent of the House of Parliament. And that's what it looks like the next morning. And the place we were going to go, some of you might have heard of, is the Bush-Up Gardens. Very famous gardens. And some of the Canadians, this was the place, not Canadians, Australians, this was the place they wanted to go to in the whole trip. We actually had 2 people who worked as wholesalers, I suppose, for plants. Although I can see, that one is actually showing it a bit brighter. It is the most amazing, the smell. The rose garden was in full flower, and the smell was just intoxicating. And let's be honest, like all these things, photos only show a little bit. And this is the sunken garden, which is how it started. It was the quarry used to make all those buildings in Victoria. And the lady of the house went, I don't want all this horrible quarry in my garden. So she got people to build her a garden. And now people literally come from far and wide to visit it. Right. This is one of my highlights. We were on this boat. Some people were daft enough to want to sit up at the front in these seats. They got a bit wet. And this is what which makes me laugh to myself. I won't go on the Capilano Bridge. I will go on a boat which is going forwards, backwards, every side way. I've got endless photos of the sky and the sea with no whales in, because we were going whale watching. But of course, the whales don't always appear when you think they're going to appear. And even worse than that, the boat does something when you're not expecting it to. So I've got hundreds of photos of absolutely nothing. But, I call this one nodule. You'll see why in a moment, or you might already realise it's got a little nodule around its dorsal fin. So there are two whales. I call them nodule and no nodule. I'm sure they're not called that, but it does it for this. They had been doing this a bit, sort of occasionally appearing, and we had been following these whales for about 10 minutes. The next bit I am purposely going to go quite fast, so you can actually see what actually happened. And then, and this is where you just think, what are you up to? Look what's happening right next door to that tail which is disappearing. The other one's coming up. They are beginning to play silly so-and-sos. They had 10 minutes of, should we just swim around? And then they got bored. And you can't really see there, but I've purposely stopped on that one, because if you look very carefully, you can even see the muscles along here. You know, these are huge animals, about 50 feet. They are huge. And, well, they began to be silly. So first of all, they did that. Oh, that's fine. I've always wanted to get a whale actually doing that. I have to be honest, I'm not entirely sure what's happening there. And the classic result was that, which is, if you can't work it out, it's all spray. I've got lots of photos of spray. But you can see they are playing. They can see us there, and they are being silly so-and-sos. Shall we show off? And so we start pulling our tails out of the water. And then this shows you what they were trying to show you what they were actually doing. So starting in the top corner, the tail comes up, it straightens, they flick it back, and then they flick it back down again. And then you think the energy they must be using to do this, not once or twice, but 15, 20 times. I've got a photo book which is filled with pictures like this, because I want every time they did it, but I wasn't going to inflict that on you. 800 pictures this one trip took. Oh, I've got a bit tired of doing that. So what I'll do is I'll lay on my side. If you look carefully, you can actually see the side of the whale there. And then you begin to try and work out, well, which whale is which, because it does get a bit confusing. Especially when they start doing that. And then the most amazing photo of the lot. They must have felt so at ease. To do this, they are laying on their back with their dorsal fins. And to me, it always reminds me of that picture of praying hands. That's a very special picture.
What sort of whales are they?
Oh, humpbacks. Sorry, I should have said that. Humpbacks. Didn't see any orcas, but did see humpbacks. And then in the end, of course, by then, all the other ships were coming round. We'd been by ourselves for most of this, and then all these other ships. We had half an hour show. And then it took us an hour to get back to shore. Pardon? Well, put it like this, the naturalists on board went, I can't tell you quite what's happened today. We've never seen that before. And then and it was decidedly bumpy. This is back into Fisherman's Wharf in Vancouver, well, Victoria Harbour. Oh, one way. And I had to talk about these. This is their water taxi. So if you want to go from one part of the harbour to another, you pay a flat rate of $2. Now I had to pay my $2. Someone else came on afterwards, wanted to go to Fisherman's Wharf. So what a shame. I had to go to Fisherman's Wharf before I went to my hotel. Right, would you excuse me for 1 second? Right, so that is the end of the actual tour side. So I'm about to join the cruise. It was a week's cruise. It was Canada Day, which is why it looks quite so manic. Whoops, I'll pick that up in a second. And even more manic along. So that's when you see Canada Wharf or Canada Place, and I'm obviously on the ship. Those of you who know Vancouver, that's Lionsgate Bridge. Notice that everyone is wearing t-shirts. It's about to change. I'm off to Alaska. To say it was cool would be an understatement. And I was very lucky, and this is actually, I can only thank Savvy Travel for this. They said the trip you really want to do is Tracy Armfield, but there's only one boat which goes, and it will be booked up quickly. But because I was on a tour, officially I couldn't book it early because I hadn't paid my money. But they worked it that I could. So this tour was already booked, fully booked by the middle of February, I checked. But I'd already got on it. And everybody else on my tour was most miffed because I'd got on it and nobody else had. Because on this, you were going up in a small boat up to a glacier. Now, those of you who might remember is when I first came here, I was a geographer. But I wasn't actually just a geographer. The big thing I absolutely loved studying was glaciation. So this was my, and I've had to cut this so much because you can imagine how many pictures of glaciers you could have had. So there's the ship. No, but that's the one, that's what we were on. That is a small ship against most nowadays. Some of you will know that some of the ships are much bigger than that. Wrong way. You can see also why they wouldn't let big ships in here. We could avoid the icebergs, they couldn't. And here's the glacier. So to give you an idea of how warm, inverted commas, it was, there was thermals, there were 2 layers of cashmere, there was then the coat and then the outer coat. And I did have gloves on, but I couldn't then because I couldn't take photos with gloves on. So it was a bit cold. And you hear about the blue ice, and if you look towards the bottom there, you can see it. That's the ice which has been starved of oxygen. I'm still doing it. And then how about that? The colour doesn't show up quite so well there, but that blue is just a deep blue. Absolutely stunning.
And there's lots underneath, isn't there?
Yes. Oh, yes. It's only. I think it's 1/7 is above. I think. I'm looking. Can anyone remember the percentage above and below? I can't remember.
It's more below.
Definitely, yeah. And then there's that. You think, well, hang on, what on earth? All those brown blobs. Well, those brown blobs are harbour seals. They can go there. The orcas can't come in because it's all the rock flower, the glacial rock flower, so the orcas can't hunt. So they can have their pups here quite safely. And so all of those brown blobs are actually harbour seals. Now, is that the one? No, that's right. I was trying to. Right, so that is going back towards Juneau, and those boats are out salmon fishing. So you still have salmon fishing happening, but nothing in this way it used to. Basically, it's been overfished. But there's a big worry because they're actually putting Atlantic salmon in salmon farms over there, and the locals are absolutely up in arms. Because, of course, they're not the right salmon. And there's real worries about what that's going to do to the ecology. So, that's Juneau. Now, I can't just do one whale watching trip. Although this one was very different. This was very quiet. You can just about see the whale in the middle. I will have to grab the pointer just in case you can't. Oh, great, it's fallen apart. So the whale's there, but you might see that there's a bit of water coming there. So completely understandably why this one was very quiet. It's a mother and calf. So the last thing the mother wants to do is to make it obvious where she is. So, and I've given you 4 pictures here. The calf is obviously this one down here because it's so much smaller. You think of some of the long ones we had earlier, and that shows it much, much clearer. Oh joy, the 4th of July. They do some odd things in America, like throwing pizzas at each other. I'm not quite sure why. I didn't understand that bit of it. But there was a pizza throwing competition, although I don't think it was quite pizzas in the way that you and I would think of pizzas. So the most common trip you do in Skagway, which is where I am, is the trip up on the train to the top of the escarpment. We're going up there. You can see the weather wasn't too good. I never was entirely sure about these bridges. They don't look very, no, they don't. That white dot down there is us. That's our ship. And you rise really quickly. Definitely, that was the old bridge. And this is when it begins to hit where we are. Skagway was one of the starting off points for the gold rush, the Yukon gold rush. This pathetic little thing here was the trail. One person behind each other. If you got out of that trail, would take you ages to get back in. And in a moment, you're going to see what they have to take up. It took them endless trips. You can see what the weather was like. Oh, you have a lovely view. Yeah. This is back in the centre of Skagway. That house on this one side is the sort of support house, the Arctic Brotherhood. When it was originally built, it was all built out of bits of wood. Now I think it's built normally and then got that stuck on the front, but never mind. Don't even try reading that. They had to take a ton of goods. Now I'm not expecting anyone to be able to read all of it, but you can have 10 pounds of pitted plums, 4 tins of condensed milk, a pound of pepper, and then, yes, it gets dafter and dafter. There's literally a ton of goods. Well, obviously, no one can take that up at once. So you had to make a choice. Did you take up a little and have to do lots of trips? Or did you take up a lot? And we're talking about coming up just where we've come up by train, which is steep. And the idea was that if you take all this lot, you're not going to die. And it was also hoped that it would put a lot of people off, that they wouldn't waste their time. And I think that's one of those pictures which makes you think, oh, 1897, that one on the left is. How things can change. And now this is my favourite place, or one of my favourites, Glacier Bay. Now, I have to hunt for it. In the middle there is a cruise ship, similar in size to us. You're only allowed 2 cruise ships per day into Glacier Bay. So obviously on whatever day it was, we were one of the ones allowed in, and the other one was a Princess. And that's it. You always have wardens on board, so that it very much it's all protected land. Yeah, you can see it a bit better there. Yeah, the mountains are mere, 10,000 feet. To get to the front of the boat was a bit of an interesting, because they actually opened up a deck which they don't normally open. But you have to sort of either be there at the crack of dawn, not me, or you have to just sort of say, please, can I take a photo, and then disappear, which is what I did. This is one of the glaciers. John Hopkins, this one. Yeah, this one, that's a slight panoramic, that one, but it's hence the fact that it does look slightly drunk, because it can't all be flat. We were so lucky with the weather. And if you were in the sun, big if you were in the sun, you could actually wear a t-shirt. If you weren't in the sun, there were lots of layers. And this is the Morangate Glacier. Again, panoramic, this one. And you might recognise that from the front of Outlook. This is the glacier everyone comes to see. And believe it or not, that is also a glacier.
but it's got a load of moraine over the top of it. Not exactly inspiring, that one. Yeah. You have to get up at stupid o'clock in the morning. So this was some sunrise at some time in the morning, for I can't even remember what time. Me and early mornings don't mix. This is Ketchikan. Some of you might know, it's meant to be the wettest places, one of the wettest places in Alaska. It had a bit of a problem that day. Now this is one I will look at the figures for. One of the statues. So it's the salmon capital of Alaska, and they still do some here, but not much. That thing on the gauge shows how much rain they got one year, but the average rain is 12.5 feet a year. So for us to be there, when, as you can see, there's not a cloud in the sky, is quite unusual. And it's known for its totem poles. And if I can remember the right way around, and even I have to check, you've got 3 bits there, and they all join together. I can't remember which way around they are, so I'm not going to try. But this one I just thought was really odd. This one I can remember. You've got the frog woman at the bottom who has salmon. You've got the raven, who is a very common one. And then you've got this crest way up here. And the reason is because that crest is so important, it can't associate with everything else. But when I saw it, I did go, pardon? Right, I just thought, where else would you find Jesuits looking quite like that? Can you imagine how much money that would cost to get your Ketchikan sewer covers? Obviously, 99% of this area was explored by Brits. And the person exploring this bit thought that that was Eddystone Rock. So it was called Eddystone Rock, after the lighthouse in Britain. Obviously, dare I say, the Brits went in, and this part of Canada, there wasn't much competition, apart from First Nations, who were just shoved off the land, I'm afraid. This again was Misty Mountains and Misty Fjords, and you're meant to go there, it's meant to be very atmospheric. It's not meant to be nice and sunshine, but never mind. It was beautiful. And again, a load more totem poles. Salmon fishing. And this is going back down through the inside passage. Now, most people's trip finished there, but I had 2 years of research, and I had researched where you could see bears, and I wanted to see my bears. So I found that if I went back over to Tofino, which is on Vancouver Island, I could go bear watching on a boat with the bears on land. These bears are not the ones who eat the salmon. It's not the right place. But they do eat rather a lot of crab. So, I get off this cruise ship, literally dump my case at the hotel I'd been staying at originally, walk along the road, and get on a seaplane. I went a bit mad, you see. And of course, this is the Olympic flame. That's what that is. That's what it was. I'm not going to say anything about these. I think it shows itself. And there's the ship that we had just literally got off of, 4 hours earlier. at Stanley Park. I hadn't realised there were quite so many islands in this area. And that's the one thing I hadn't really talked about, was the timber. It doesn't look much there, but that's about 10 tree trunks per bundle, and there are thousands of bundles here. But then you see what it does to the town, to the island. There's no habitation there. All there are roads, which are logging roads. And then you think, well, if you've cleared that, and then there's lots of rain, you think of the rain we've had today, the erosion that would cause. They're now realising that they need to stop doing it the way they're doing it here. Not clear fell, but selectively fell, which of course is much more difficult, but more sustainable. Oh, and what a shame I had to sit and look out over a beach. Real hardship. But the water is so cold that everyone who goes there, it's a surfing place. These are all surfers. They're all wearing wetsuits. Those of you who will go to the memorial service, you will recognise that picture. That was the sunset that I was watching. Oh, I went too fast, sorry. Next morning, I'm on a bear hunt. And these bears are black bears, but they are a special subspecies because they've been they're separated from their cousins on the mainland. Now, I want you to look, because I'm going to go through these fairly quickly in a moment. This rock here. This rock is about this big. Watch what happens to that seaweed. Oh, hang on, it's disappeared. It's just gone. And that's why they're so petrified of bears, the power of their paws. And some of the videos I had of this is just mind-blowing. And he gets his whatever. Then another one appears and does exactly the same thing. Just to prove that there was other animals around. And then this one did look a bit older, and it looks as if he'd been in a few fights. His nose looks decidedly scratched. And then, these are the sweet things. These are the sea otters. There's a raft of them. There's a huge number at this point. And they are all watching what we're doing, as you can see. But we still haven't got the one who waves yet. That comes later. So this is Tofino. Two things. Number one, on this one, this is the sign, and this is a bear bin. It's not for bears, it's for us to put our rubbish in. I never quite worked out how to get into it, because it's so secure as far as I was concerned. And then how many can us imagine that you'd have pictures of whales across your zebra crossing? Not often. So, surprise, surprise, I went on another whale watching. This one was interesting, I think is the word I'm going to use. There was about 6 of us on a very small boat. We were going against the wind, against the tide. So to call it bumpy was an understatement. I was fine. And I've purposely put this in because I think sometimes you can't really work things out. That's something we all recognise. That's an elephant. That's how big an elephant is. That is the humpback. And the one above it, which I'm also going to show you, although not much of, is the grey whale. Now, the grey whale are only there to feed. So they're not there they're literally there, he said they'll be there for 2 weeks. Then they'll move on. But before we got there, we saw my sea otters close to, including my waving one. James said, he doesn't wave at you. No, but he's waving. What is so, and I think it is sweet, they find the stone they want, because of course they bash their food on their stomachs. They find the stone they want to use, and once they've got the perfect stone, they have a special pocket underneath their arms where they put it. So they always keep the same stone. The only time they might lose that is if a mother hands it on to her pup. But to me, it was just the amazement of nature. Right, it's a bit difficult to see this because they're not clear. Down here is a grey whale. He's in fact not all grey, he's got yellow and numerous other colours because that algae grows on him. And you can see how close to land he is. They literally are bottom feeders, so they are literally just diving down and feeding. And they said they were there for 2 weeks, and they said, you're really lucky to be here when they're here. They're not common. That's a bit better, though, to at least see there's a grey whale. But there was also my friend, another humpback. This one was called Crisis by the team. He hadn't appeared until this year. He was associating with grey whales, not with humpbacks. And he's got very unusual markings. Those markings are because he's been attacked by an orca and also got caught in trawler nets. So he was very much by himself. But boy, oh boy, did he want to show off. The only problem is, Anne's photo of this is very bad. That's a breaching whale, believe it or not. He breached 4 times, so I saw him breach, but to try and catch him, because of course you don't know when they're going to appear. I got the splash for afterwards, though. And then on the way back, we saw the Steller sea lions. These are the biggest sea lions in the world. Now, to say that this was bouncing was an understatement. Thankfully, we were between 2 islands, so we were just about able to take photos as we were going like this. And in great contrast, there's that. My last day in Canada. Still in Tofino. And I suddenly worked out that I had enough time to go bear watching again. I'm a bit mad with wildlife, you might have realised that now. But first we had to see a load of harbour seals because we could not find bears. And these harbour seals rest up. Now the tide is going down, which is why they've claimed their places on not much in particular, because of course it is slightly safer. Because of course their big problem is orcas do rather like harbour seals. And then we saw them. This is one bear only. But you know my love of reflections. You can imagine what I was doing here. You can't really see it, but there is very clearly his paw there, and you begin to realise how big these things are. So this is a trip and a half this day. I'm in Tofino. I now need to get back. Oh yes, what I forgot about. It's rather steep. Quite an interesting slope to go up and down, I can tell you. So off I go on a seaplane. Then I get on taxi to the airport. This is on the plane. Yes, that is the pilot's seat, but we hadn't taken off at that point. Vancouver. And this is sunset over Canada, ironically near Yellowknife. Yellowknife might ring a bell because that's one of those places which had to be completely emptied because of the forest fires. And so that's both from Hilary and I. I will also like to give my special thanks to Hilary, because without it, you wouldn't have been able to see what Banff looked like. And so thank you to a number of people who have helped out in numerous different ways, but from buying biscuits to serving tea and coffee to doing the audio. So much appreciated. If you want to give a donation to Faze, please feel free to, there's a bowl out there. But thank you for coming, and I wanted to make sure it wasn't too late to finish because it's not been very nice weather.
And